That I am speaking with Arnold Zable in North Geelong. Good afternoon, Arnold.
Hi, good to speak to you.
Yes, and welcome to, I was going to say Harbour City, I don't know where I got that from. But as I introduce Arnold, if I say you're a bit of a Melbourne institution, Arnold, I'm not putting you in the into the old folks' home quite yet, but or much less talking to you as a museum piece. But as a long-time English teacher, I have to say that your books have been a wonderful resource for many an English teacher and many an English class over the years, and your writing has inspired and interested a lot of people. You've been prominent. I've read you often, of course, in newspaper articles and historical publications and novels, and your special interest, I suppose, but you can tell us about that. I guess your special interest has been in European migrants, particularly people who came out here from Central Europe, Jewish people and so on. So is that what's happening today?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, interestingly enough, I've written about immigrants, refugees, across the border that were, I mean, certainly my own story. My parents were Russian, Polish Jews. That's figured prominently in some of my books, but one of my books is a novel, See How Many Returns, which actually documents the journeys of Ithacans from, you know, these are immigrants from the Greek island of Ithaca, and my wife's family comes from there, and I've been here from time to time, lived in the village where my wife's family comes from, been there with my son Alexander, sometimes for 3 or 4 months on end, and out of all those stories I heard, I constructed See How Many Returns, and recently, in a recent book, Violin Lessons, I've been writing stories that are set in all the way from Venice to Berlin to Eastern Europe again, Poland, to Iraq and Vietnam and Cambodia, among other places. And I guess, you know, all these stories have got an intimate connection with what I'm doing tonight, which is a talk, ARCS, the Multicultural Aged Care Services Centre out in Wattle Road in Geelong North. I'm doing a talk titled Celebrating Migrant Stories.
Yes.
But actually I would say celebrating life stories in general,
Yes.
from a migrant background or not.
Yes. And congratulations on your work, your life work so far. And I did, in fact, review Violin Lessons early last year. And I don't know how you got away with that in my interviewing you, Arnold, but I was a bit remiss there. And, of course, North Geelong, I grew up in Geelong, and in the 1950s I remember vividly and very happily, I must say, I was going to the Catholic primary school in West Geelong, and suddenly it wasn't just beautiful girls, there were some beautiful girls, but these lovely kids from the Ukraine, from Lithuania, from Poland suddenly arrived in grade 2 and 3. So Geelong's I suppose Geelong was multicultural before the word was used.
Yeah, it reminds me of my own childhood in Carlton. You know, one of my novels, Scraps of Heaven, is set in Carlton of the 50s and 60s, and I guess yes, there were a number of suburbs, and I think North Geelong and Bell Park,
yeah.
Carlton. It was certainly another Collingwood, the inner urban suburbs of Melbourne,
yes,
that were multicultural long before the word
yes,
was in vogue. I mean, really, one thing that really, really interests me about that time and those communities is, and something which I'm still writing about and exploring, and needs to be explored, I think, is the relationship between the immigrants communities and the older working class Aussies that were living there, had lived there for generations. And
indeed,
there were a lot of good things happened. I mean, we know there were conflicts as well, but there were lots of interesting examples of people crossing cultural boundaries and getting to know each other and finding what they had in common, as well as respecting each other's differences. And so I think that's part of the story. That's why I would broaden what I have to celebrating life stories in general. I mean, at the heart of it is, how do you create an inclusive vision of
yes,
who we are?
Yes.
And very often I'd like to tell this anecdote that back in the 1840s, an American journalist and social reformer travelling in Ireland, noticed that the people's lips were green. They were green because they were eating grass. And they're eating grass in this part of Ireland, nothing else to eat because of the potato blight. And out of a population of 8 million, over 1 million died and over 1 million got onto boats. And in a period of several decades, up to 3 million got onto boats from that one country alone. And 15 million people who left the British Isles in the second half of the 19th century were the largest,
diaspora.
boat people, or largest diaspora in modern history. So really it's an inclusive story of who we are that we're about, and give or take a few generations, except for Indigenous people, we all come from somewhere else.
And I guess the lesson too, Arnold, is that maybe many of us so-called older Australians maybe need to remember that in view of some of the awful legislation that we've been thrust upon us in the last 10 years or so. But let's not digress too far. But I remember my dad, who worked on building sites in Geelong in the 50s and 60s, bringing home a capsicum. But the Italian guy who gave it to him didn't tell him what to do with it. And I remember them in the kitchen at home, cutting it open and tasting a little bit of it raw. No, it didn't taste. He didn't have a clue on how to cook it, and anyway, before long, Dad was trading his backyard veggies with the Italian blokes, and they were telling us what to do with the capsicum, and life goes on. Now, so this evening's occasion. Tell us a little bit about the actual occasion, and we will remind people throughout the afternoon where it's taking place. Arnold, you're speaking at 8 o'clock, is it?
Yeah, I'm speaking at 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Sorry, you better get that right. Yes.
Yeah, from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock at the MAX, the Multicultural Aged Care Services,
yes.
100 Wethel Road. And really I'll talk about how do you create in a place like MAX, but in general, in our communities, a culture that values stories. Because I think of creating a harmonious society is to share our stories. And time and time again, I found that if you do share your stories, there are two things that come out of it. One is you hear about interesting differences in culture, but ultimately you start to see that we share much more in common, and it's by sitting down and sharing those stories that we do. But I guess the other thing I'm going to focus on is how do you encourage and create such a culture where people are willing to tell stories, and also in more challenging conditions when you're dealing with the aged, or increasingly dealing with people with dementia too.
Yes.
How do you create a culture that is conducive to stories, is more challenging environments too? So I think whether you're interested in writing your own life story or telling your own life story, whether you're from the older Australian generations that I mentioned before from the British Isles, or whether you're from the European wave of migrations of the immediate post-war period, or whether you are from the more recent arrivals that are coming from many parts of the world, I think I'd like to show what sort of stories are being told, how to tell the stories, and how to encourage others to tell those stories.
Very good. Now, my guest today is Arnold Zable, who will be speaking at 7 o'clock tonight at Max in Waddell Road, North Geelong. And I'm really pleased to have Arnold here today because, as I said, if you haven't read Arnold before, a very good place to start would be Violin Lessons, because I suppose of its more global coverage in the stories he's told there. Yes, it's interesting, Arnold, too, of course. I'm in my late 60s, so those kids, as they were then, that I went to primary school with, their parents would be well and truly at the heading towards the century, I suppose. So it'll be maybe the next generation that you're trying to catch, as it were.
Oh yeah, well look, Violin Lessons is a book, as you said too, it's got a more reach, but in a way, there are certain common themes which are relevant to what I'm going to be speaking about tonight in that book too. I mean, you have the title story is about a man from Baghdad with a Jewish background who eventually emigrated to Melbourne, plays beautiful Arabic music on the violin, and it's also about my old music teacher back in Carlton, and how, you know, these communities, these immigrants brought with them their music and their various lifestyles, and we've all benefited from them. But also, you know, these are struggle. It's not easy making a new life in a new world. I mean, one of the things that I'm talking about tonight, that if you look at the stories of those who make the journey from the old world to the so-called new world, what you will see is that there's often a 3-act drama at work. You know, there's the time before, that is, you know, the country you once lived in, the community you once had. You often find there's a great deal of nostalgia for that in later life. And the act of the drama is, I guess, making the journey, deciding I need to find a new life for all kinds of reasons, all the way from impoverishment through to sometimes, you know, you feel you're the black sheep of the family and you can distinguish yourself in another place, all the way through to the more dramatic reasons that people seek freedom and escape from oppressive regimes. But whatever it is, that leads to the final act, which is sometimes the longest act, depending how old you are when you arrive in a new country, and that is, you know, the roller coaster, which is the rest of your life, say living in Geelong or in Melbourne or whatever. So I'm going to look a little bit how you break down the story of these journeys and what to look out for, and I guess in violin lessons, that's an exercise in a way. It's an exercise in storytelling, in how you can construct a beautiful, flowing story from a number of threads, and to get across a certain point, I guess.
Now, Arnold, in regard to the project, are you actually launching a project today to encourage people to come to you or come to someone with their stories?
Well, I've been invited by Max because they, to their great credit, want to create, in their own aged care facilities, they want to create an environment, origin story, and they want to create an environment that respects the elderly, and crucial to that respect is to know who they are. I mean,
Indeed.
I can tell, and I will tell stories tonight, incredible stories about how someone who may be completely ignored and overlooked, and once you find out a few facts about their life, not only are they transformed, but the whole place is transformed.
Yes.
So it's a matter of... So then from there I'm going to explore how do you trigger such stories in the more challenging situations like dementia.
Yes.
So what I'm hoping is from what I'm saying tonight, will come away with not only inspired perhaps to tell and write their own stories, but also to see how you do trigger the story. I mean, it can be a photograph that triggers a great story. Sometimes it can be a piece of music. Sometimes it can be an object like a brooch or a necklace. I mean, there's lots of beautiful, beautiful ways to trigger a story. And when you know them, things start to open up in a way that you could never have imagined past.
Okay. Well, it's a wonderful project, and I'll look forward to hearing how it develops, I guess. And the story is just so important, and I'm a fairly recent grandfather, and the grandkids just love to hear stories from when we were little, you know. Out where you're speaking today was where we used to go trapping rabbits on Sunday. You know, we used to get on the bikes, Dad and the three boys, and literally where you are tonight. There are rabbit burrows everywhere.
See, there's a story for every place.
There is indeed. Yes. Well, all the best tonight, Arnold, and I hope that the people of Geelong make you very welcome, as I'm sure they will, and best of luck with the project, and please keep doing the wonderful writing and so on that you have done so far, and thank you very much for being with us on The Blurb.
And thank you for having me on, Bernard. Pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Arnold.